Well, that's already much gentler than I remember it. Welcome, everyone. As you saw, Ben just hit recording, and you are welcome to turn off your camera or rename yourself. But this recording has really helped us synthesize information and then share it out again for the larger community. Welcome, everyone. I think I've met most everyone. My name is Justine Johnson. I work at Kirkridge Retreat and Study Center and also support the Retreat Center collaboration through community calls. My hope for today is that we kind of ground ourselves in retreat-centeredness, but also grow our edges and where we can develop this conversation, potential collaborations further. Today will be conversation, both in small group and large group shares. And then at the end, so at the top of the hour, the invitation is to stay or go. We know this is a busy time for many retreat centers who are reopening or reimagining. Summer can be quite busy for retreat centers, especially those doing camps. So at the top of the hour, the invitation is to stay and see if any potential collaborations or things we want to dig deeper into have risen up during the conversation. And that's how we'll close out the second half, or the 30 minutes left. And Ben, I think to kick us off, you have some announcements.
Yes, I do. Two of these I've mentioned in our newsletter that just went out today. But there are some collaboration opportunities, sort of like what we're hoping might arise out of this conversation, that just became possible via separate from the RCC networks, which is really cool. And so the opportunity is coming to us, and so we're passing it on to folks in our network here. One of them is that Barbara Vacker, the former CEO of Kripalu in New York, has gathered together a small group of retreat center leaders and connected them with an online learning platform called Ubiquity University. And they are working together to collaborate on some curriculum design to go onto that platform. And she is putting forward an invite to folks in the RCC community if they also want to be a part of that conversation and see what might be possible for retreat centers to work together to put things up on this global online platform. So I'm going to put a note in the chat for who you can contact if you want to be a part of that conversation. And then there's also another opportunity here that comes from Liz Walls, who is the director at Genesis Spirituality Center. Many of you know her. Liz is holding a big event for their center and bringing in Sister Joan Chittister as the speaker. And she had this idea that this could be held collaboratively with other centers, and that the speaker portion would just be one portion of the event, and that you could hold something separate at your center, a conversation group, some other discussion or meal, or even a service. And it could all be kind of tied into the same presentation that Sister Joan Chittister would give. So if you think that might be something that your center would enjoy, it looks like Justine's put that in the chat too. Both of those are also in the newsletter that just went out this morning. So kind of cool how our network is rippling outward with these other little ideas that didn't really come from us, but we can pass them on to you and see what we can kind of all learn together as those connections are made. I did want to highlight too, just the couple of breakout rooms that we have coming up, and I think Justine said that too, so that you can plan your schedule if you have other stuff you need to jump off to. We don't get you cornered into a breakout room. I think that's all I have on my end.
Thanks, Ben. Are there any questions? We have space today. Are there any questions about those two opportunities? Also, I will say it's lightning and thundering here. Hopefully I don't lose you, but if that happens, I know Ben will carry this. Wonderful. If a question, comment, or concern does come to you, please put it in the chat, either through direct message or for public, if you believe everyone can grow and learn from that question. So really today, for those who attended Flourishing Together, this will be a bit of a recap with hopefully additional and expansive information. And for those who weren't able to make our opening session, this is wonderful as it's an ever-growing concept and conversation. But I wanted to give a little bit of context before we start populating or generating information. Uh, so thanks, Ben. What we know is retreat centers are a sector, but they're also diverse and varied experiences, from urban to rural spaces, from faith-based to non-faith or interfaith. There's quite a diversity in the retreat centers, but we've come to understand that there are some main values, especially through the retreat center collaboration, that binds us together as a community. We also recognize that in this community, we are not only retreat center leaders, as in leadership or administration. We have organizations, social justice or movement makers, board volunteers, growing community of people who love retreat centers and are invested in their survival. And so for me to have all of those lenses engage in this conversation, there's deep value in understanding what we understand about retreat, but also retreat centeredness. So in 2018, and then just recently in Flourishing Together, we asked those questions. What is our unique niche, or what are the values and themes that drive retreat centeredness? So there was also a lot of conversation about just the semantic field of, Oren used the phrase like, what is a chair? How do we define it? Knowing that there's this continuum of understandings. That's the same for retreat centers. There is different lenses, perspectives, and ways we bring the energy of our work into focus. So it's quite large. And there's a special value. I'm looking at my notes. There were two things that were specific notes or value added to what is centeredness. So we can talk about retreats, we know retreats, but what does it mean to center down, focus on centering, and really truly delve into the idea of centeredness? And then let's see if there's one more. And then new expressions of retreat centers. So do identities, I can hear thundering. Can you all hear this? Okay, so sorry. What constitutes a retreat center? And we have quite a range, and many people who come with different definitions to that. So Ben, do you have our slides ready? So we did this Jamboard of people populated the chat specifically during the Flourishing Together retreat. What is retreat centeredness now? And especially during COVID or in 2021. And Oren, I am not Oren, so I'll just try and do justice to that, said, let's populate the chat. And even if you have the same idea as someone else, say it again so we understand how many people are coming from that perspective. So it could have been about nature. And we saw 20 people populate the chat with nature. So it moved closer to the center of our conversation. It was a larger theme or understanding of retreat centeredness. And we did get a comment that the Jamboard was overwhelming, which was true. So I'm going to show it to you in two ways. One is the Jamboard itself. And there were 6 themes identified: holding space together. A new one that was added that wasn't so prevalent a couple of years ago, being online. That gathering has a new meaning. So it's not restricted by place or space, that you can be online. And online spaces increase access. But we're still holding true to the 3 themes on the left: sacred space, nature, and a place for inner journey. Those were really continued themes. That it was a space that brought inner peace, that invited calmness, and you could work on interpersonal relationships, healing, being in a reflective stage, and I love this, being fed, being nourished. So if that's not enough to look at, what I did was instead of manually entering things that could be centered, I made a word cloud do that work for me. So what we saw arise, this is again me populating 20 times nature space, was said that there were some things centered to our work. And I'm just going to sit and let you soak this in for a minute, and then we can really engage with this. In either the Jamboard or in this word cloud, does something speak to you? Is something emerging for you as you read all of these words, regardless of size of the word? And so if you're unfamiliar with word clouds, the more times you enter it, the larger it gets. So perhaps maybe inclusion or transfiguration was only entered once, where space could have been entered 20 or 25 times. What are you noticing? And what does it mean to be a retreat center in 2021? And I'll just give you another minute to hold those questions. You're welcome to populate the chat, but I'll invite you to speak to that in a minute as well. Thanks, Marianne. So new relationships and well as silent sanctuary. So Ben, I think you can stop sharing the screen. I'll make sure people have access to these two JPEGs. And I invite you to unmute your audio or speak in or populate the chat to anything, but I did put two guiding questions in there.
I guess I love the idea of space and sacred and silence, and which is what we have had before COVID. We were offering that in person, and somehow virtually that's still been maintained in some ways during the programs we've offered on Zoom. But we're going to offer at the end of this month one of our first directed retreats, a silent retreat, and it filled up in 2 days. We had to get another director, so we're up to 25 people and 8 on the waiting list. That never happened before for a 3-day directed retreat. And so it just shows the hunger of coming to the place and being with others and enjoying the beautiful nature on the Hillsborough River. It spoke to me that is the gift that retreat centers can offer: the silence and the space and nature. And those were all reflected in that wonderful JPEG.
I was drawn to the little words. So, and I know that means that one person or two people said it instead of a whole bunch of people. And I think the reason why I was drawn to the little words is precisely for that reason, because the things that we share, we all go, yeah, this is it. But I'll tell you, there are two words of the little words that I was drawn to in particular. One is counterpoint, because in musical theory, there's a very complex set of rules that go around counterpoint, but essentially it's a melody that is played along with another melody, and they don't harmonize together, but they coordinate. And so I love the idea of two melodies in parallel that are they're making their own statements, but they are interwoven and they together make something complex and beautiful. And then the other one, and I don't know if it's a typo, but it's the word salience. It's instead of silence. It's the word salience is actually an ordinary excellence, right? It's the excellence that happens in ordinary life that you don't notice. And I thought, well, yes, that's what retreat centers are about. It's providing excellence in an ordinary way so that the excellence doesn't show, but supports what's going on. And I just really love those two words, counterpoint and salience. So that's my notice about this.
I want to follow up because I too just sort of honed in on salience, wondered if it should be silence, and then was delighted that it was salience. But I also just want to say that that's what I love about this group. Only here, Naomi, could I find somebody else who would actually take the time to look up salience and to, and of course, the other thing that came to me is resilience, which is the other piece that as we come back together, I think is such an important word for retreat centeredness, finding resilience, not only for ourselves and our participants, but for our very retreat centers, many of which are carefully guarded, protected pieces of nature that are so endangered. So I think about all of those things, and I loved, Justine, the way you shared the words and the way that you did the word cloud as well as the other piece. Just looking at all of that makes me want to sell posters to make money for RCC because they're gorgeous. And they're important, I think, as we move into 2021 to take that in and to really pay attention to what's emerging, both the big words and, as Naomi pointed out, the smaller ones, because in our work, everybody's voice matters. And I think part of my own struggle is with the word retreat center, because people have stereotypes about what it means and whether to try to reclaim it as we move into this opportunity after COVID or whether to change it. And I don't have an answer to that, but I love where this is going. Thank you.
I'm thinking about, yes, retreat centers being a sacred and an important space, given where we are within our country or within the world, like this way in which the pandemics have pressed centers to transform, and some of them no longer being in existence in a physical space, and how retreat centeredness can still live beyond the retreat center, brings, I think, good news and or hope for those who may not have been able to attend a retreat center. How do we support people in being more retreat centered, which means being your own retreat for yourself as a way to calm, nourish, and rebuild the self. Retreat centers, or people who run retreat centers, can offer retreat centeredness, and allowing people to understand that they can reclaim their own power to kind of nurture themselves, even if they are not able to physically visit a retreat center space. So it's an essential for everyone to understand their capacity to be a retreat center for self. And then that center can extend within community.
My vision is bad. So for me to look at those, diagrams is difficult. So the things that jump out obviously are the big words and the dark words. And so space obviously jumped out. And as I think Maureen said, sacred space. But the word, and I'm not sure if it was up there or not, but the word that comes very much and resonates with me is healing space, especially now. So healing for the people that come to us, healing for our staff. And so how do we bring about and ensure that that healing, and you know, people have been using the word nurturing, and obviously that's important too, but that becomes a focus for us. What I struggle with as we look to reopen, and our reopening is very slow, it's hard after so long to recapture. And I know we don't always want to do everything the way we did it before, but we certainly want to do the things that we did well before. And I find myself, as I plan or as we get ready for something, thinking, oh my gosh, I forgot that. And so I suppose for me, that's part of the healing and the bringing forth of taking the new and bringing from what is important and valuable for us to continue. Because there is no question that people do have a hunger and are searching. And I too find that people are seeking the actual space. We are getting less and less responses to the virtual opportunities, and more responses to the in-person, that we're beginning to offer. So how do we focus on making this truly a healing space, a healing time, a healing opportunity?
I didn't
Go ahead.
I didn't see the words, but the phrase that runs through my mind right now is that line from T.S. Eliot about being the still point of a turning world. I think it comes like from Four Quartets, one of his pieces of poetry. And maybe for me that best summarizes what retreat centeredness is about right now. It's neither moving towards nor moving away, but it's that invitation to come down and be, just to be. And I would agree, I think more and more as we are able, people are longing to come back to our houses if they still exist. Manreese has gone from 22 to 50 capacity. We're not at 50, but we welcome. So, and people are coming. Our IDRs, our individually directed retreats this summer, are all almost full. Mm-hmm. So there's something about the very physicality of our centers that I don't think will go away. But it's also trying to say, how can that still pointedness touch those who can't physically come? So I think it's neither an either or, but I think it's a both and. It's not necessarily physical, and it's not totally spiritual. It's a mixture to be that still point in the turning world.
Thanks, everyone. The invitation, we have space for one more comment, but I just wanted to say a couple things that I already am starting to see themes that run on a continuum from retreat as a step away from the everyday, and as Lauren said, now integrating it into your everyday, that you are becoming that centeredness of retreat for yourself and others. And then also, I'm just gonna put an asterisk as a person who made both the Jamboard and the JPEG that I copied and pasted, and there are much wiser people in this space than I. So I'm not gonna believe it was a typo. My hope is that people wrote what they meant and enlightened all of us in that. So with this conversation, unless there's one more person who would like to speak, I think we can
I'd be happy to offer comment.
Sonia, please.
Sure. And I haven't joined your group before, so yeah, it's nice to meet you. Yeah, what an impressive group. So interesting, the conversation so far. I'm the executive director at Southern Dharma Retreat Center, which is an hour outside of Asheville, North Carolina. It's a primarily Buddhist, but also interfaith ecumenical retreat center. I was surprised not to see contemplation on there, at least on that second slide. And then another one that occurs to me, which I know sounds a little weird, which is community, because in a way, right, retreat centers, we kind of think of them as, in a way, the retreat from, the social world. And yet I can see that Southern Dharma functions kind of as this, like we said, the still point at the center, as almost like the still point of the center of the web. Like when the web is, moving in different ways, it's not that we're not interconnected. It's, again, like I love that point about how it's like the complementarity, but it's not that we're not connected to community. It's just that we're the still point in the center, So for me, community has really emerged as something incredibly important during the pandemic. And, we ended up offering something like 30 programs since the beginning of the pandemic, and found, really, basically thousands of people who wanted to stay connected to the center even when they couldn't physically be here. So yeah, and thanks for having this group, and look forward to participating.
Welcome, and thank you for contributing as well. That's wonderful. This is a wise group. So I think we are, as I say and Ben says, knowers and learners. So there's going to be a lot of sharing. And that's the next invitation. Ben and I both gave you a heads up about breakout rooms. So we're going to move into a smaller conversation of 4 or 5 people about questions of what we just shared and the images you saw. And Sister Jane Marie, thanks for that reminder. And so not only will I supply those JPEGs, but I'll also give that written format so we can look at the actual words. And as we sit with that, my questions, again, take them or leave them. If they call to you, wonderful. And if not, I'm sure you have your own questions. How will this understanding of retreat center or retreat centeredness impact your work at your retreat center or organization? What is emerging for you? What are you seeing more clearly? And what questions are you holding? So I can put that in the chat as well. And before Ben breaks us up into groups, my invitation is once you get into that room, so we'll have about 22 minutes together. Once you get into that room, I invite you into silence or contemplation or journaling to just hold those questions or hold your reflection about what we've just discussed. And then after 2 minutes or so, or whenever that feels right for your group, invite each other to share. That is optional. How you use the small breakout group is optional, but I would remind people to give space for everyone's voice to be heard who wants to be heard. Are there questions before I send you out into, or Ben sends you out into the breakout groups?
Could you repeat the questions just one more time?
Yes. Oh, Ben, will you plop them in the chat as well? Yeah. Oh, great. How will this understanding of retreat center or retreat centeredness impact your work at your retreat center or organization? What is emerging for you? What are you seeing more clearly now? Usually we only do 3 questions, but here's an added one. What questions are you still holding? We'll come back after the 22 minutes and share that, and then go into a conversation about how the retreat center collaboration can support you in this work.
All right, I have the breakout rooms ready, so shall we?
Ben, we ended perfectly on time.
So glad to hear it.
Where's the other group? Well, the last group was forced to come back to the main room, so I hope it was fruitful. Welcome back, everyone. Good, I see a lot of nodding heads. So this space, again, is voluntary and invitational, but I know my group had a beautiful conversation, one that was spaced appropriately and lovingly about questions, and mostly what we're still continuing to hold about retreat center work and retreat centeredness. We have a couple minutes for share back, and then I'm gonna put a document in the chat that we can also populate about moving from this conversation into what else do we need and how can we offer each other support, not just RCC offering support, but how can we really work together? And then we'll close out the formal session of this and talk about potential collaborations for identifying. Would anyone like to share a takeaway, a meaningful takeaway from your small group chat?
Sally in our group said she does not want any return to normal. She's looking for not some strategic planning, but some emerging planning that will alter the course for Kirkridge, right, Sally? And so the strength of that statement coming out of this pandemic is really appealing to me. I like to hear that kind of assertiveness, that we've all been weakened by the time period we've been through, but now we're not going to claim a normal back. We're going to seek out something better and bigger.
Thanks, Sally and via Ken. That's great. Seeking out something better and bigger. Thank you.
I was not in a small group, but this image keeps rising up as people talk. The Sankofa image, the bird holding the egg and flying forward, sort of bringing what's best from behind, but not going backward, just carrying it forward. I just think that really applies to so many different perspectives that people have shared here. So I'll just verbalize it.
Great. You're welcome to populate the chat if we don't feel much more like speaking. And then the next thing I'd like to do is put a document that we actually intended to use during Flourishing Together. For those of you who were there, you know we didn't get to it. For those of you who weren't there, this is going to be new. It's new to all of us. So my invitation is to join. I think you should all have access to it and can edit this document. And the question ahead is, in this new space, what kind of help, connection, and support would allow your center to do its best work? If you can populate this, you are welcome to do that. This is an open document, so if you wake up at 3 a.m. from a thunderstorm and come up with this brilliant idea, please add it then. It is continuously growing, hopefully, and that Ben and I can come back to this, you can come back to this and say, yes, that conversation, I'm going to connect with this person or reach out to Ben to offer support. And that's the invitation. Ben, do you want to add anything? I'm not sure the original intent of the document, but I want to make sure I'm honoring that.
Oren and I were working together to do some of this retreat centeredness questioning to open up our retreat for Flourishing Together. And we didn't want to spend too much time in headspace. We really wanted to bring it down to our individual work at our retreat centers, and then show where actually we might have what each other needs, and bring it into a collaborative space. And we just didn't get time in that first session. It was so rich. It was like being in a thunderstorm of words as people were putting things in the chat. It was unending. And so I'm glad that we honored that, because that was what needed to happen at that time. But I think there's still room for us to sort of land together on, okay, this is where I see my center and where I have room to grow. And this is just something I'm going to put out there to the community. So it's a little bit more personal. And I hope that that invitation makes sense for folks. I wish we could have spent more time in that space, that sort of generative, what is the nugget of my work that's most essential to what I do? But I'm glad that we're able to get into that conversation here.
Diana, is there any context you'd like to offer? I want to make sure we're missing something. Okay. Wonderful.
I'm not exactly sure if this fits or flows with where we are, but it keeps coming to me. In our small group, we talked about how to do it, first to know ourselves and to understand our uniqueness as a retreat center, as a space, as a place, and then how to take that message out to the world. And Ken made the point that, I'm paraphrasing Ken, but that if you know one retreat center, you know one retreat center, that each of us is so different and so unique. And then we also, though, held up the gift that RCC brings, and that we literally just saw when you screen shared, Justine, which are those things that we have in common. So it seems like, again, it's a both and of identifying our unique gifts for each retreat center that's part of the retreat center collaboration, but also knowing the ground on which we stand, that when somebody says it's in the retreat center collaboration, that we know what that means. You know, that we all have this commitment to those words that we loved so much, that it's more than you know, simply a place to come and go in, but it's also a place to then bring your inner self back into the outer world in some way.
Thanks, Sally. I see a couple people typing, and most are anonymous. If you wanted to know that, many of you are anonymous, and you can see like anonymous platypus is drafting something right now in the Word document. But if that doesn't suit what you need, or you want to verbalize something with truly remaining anonymous, you are welcome to direct message me or add it at a later time. I just want to extend that invitation as we get ready to close out. And this is already so rich with suggestions and comments and what our hopes and needs are in regards to support. Lots of work ahead. I had said in my small group that this conversation is definitely not one and done. And we already learned that with the second conversation, and we'll continue to have this, whether it's offline in our Mighty Network hubs or conversations, or if it's another community call we'd be interested to hear. Ben, shall we close out the first hour of this program with any announcements before people may need to scoot.
I wonder if we might just get a quick read from folks about what they would hope to see during the next 2 months in terms of community calls. We have a couple topics lined up, but I know this is just a busy time for retreat centers. And so if there are certain topics that are more helpful or less helpful that we can delay, just to get a read from people while I have you in front of me, that would be helpful for us as Justine and I are planning. Anything specific that's pretty hot for you that you need help with?
I'd love to have people share as they go back. And one of the invitations you gave us earlier today was sort of a hybrid retreat of that one retreat center is going to have a speaker. I don't like the word hybrid, but because that's a mule, but I would love to understand. You know, it's been in the conversation all day today in different places that our retreat centers during COVID have been accessible to people to whom we've never been accessible before. And we want to reopen and be on site in place. So as people experiment with how they're doing both, and I'd love to know what's working and what's not.
Great. Good to hear.
I'd also like to hear about how people help make space for both silence and contemplation, and as well as I liked the word new relationships, the times that people want to connect. Sometimes I find it's easy to make space for some maybe teachings and connections, and people enjoy that. And really the sacred space of a retreat center, sometimes almost naturally, if you go out for a walk outside, you know, can create that space, but I'm a little more challenged without a space to create that space for quiet. Or I wonder how many other people have struggled with it, inviting groups to that quiet space to integrate what they've heard and learned.
Good.
I like that we just, oh, okay. If there are other suggestions or comments, please let us know. And also the invitation goes out to all of you. You all are walking wisdom. And if you have something to share, that's our invitation. This is not the Ben and Justine show. That's coming later, maybe a podcast. We'll let you know. No, I'm just kidding. No podcast. But the invitation is for all of us to share. And so we have one specific one, as Ben said, our summer programming's open, but we are hoping to have another community call at the very least about land legacies. That was a really moving session during our Flourishing Together, and it again is supposed to be continued. We don't have all the answers, and we're growing and walking this path together. And we have that scheduled for July 13th. Ben has invited some people to speak, and we know all of you have a story about land legacy. If you're interested in sharing 5 to 10 minutes of your experience or your retreat center or organization's experience, we would love to hear it and make space for that. We're also hearing that there is space for another similar session like Heal the Healer that was during Flourishing Together. What heart-centered work can we do together to build community and give you space for rest and renewal too? If you have something to offer, we would greatly appreciate it. And you might get an email in your inbox with a specific ask as well. But if you have something to share with this group, we want to hear that. And that's a little shout out to Naomi from a year ago when we were talking about storytelling. We all have stories and we want to hear them as a community. We want to share them. We want to amplify them and really lift them up. So that's a very vague open invitation, but I hope you take Ben and I up on it and we can see how it unfolds or emerges for you.
I think I might just add that that land legacies topic is so broad, and that's how it's meant to be. So if your center has done something specifically around land, whether that be protection of land, sustainability, agriculture, food production, resilience, shifting over to solar, whatever it may be that your center has done, and it might be an insight to other centers, we'd love to hear the story of the work you've been doing. Even if it's just at the beginning stages, it's helpful for us to know what's happening. Great.
So let's stop the recording if that's okay. And the invitation is we know